That being said, I am very happy to introduce Ted Brodkin, MD, an associate professor of psychiatry with tenure at the Perelman School of Medicine at the University of Pennsylvania. He is the founder and director of the Adult Autism Spectrum Program at Penn Medicine, as well as Ashley Pallathra, MA, a clinical researcher and therapist. She is currently pursuing her PhD in clinical psychology at the Catholic University of America in Washington, D.C. Thank you both so much for joining this evening. I'm going to go ahead and mute myself and let you take it away.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Elena, for having us. We were really excited to do sort of, a small event to kind of talk about the book and just dive in a little bit more deeply. And I guess since this is a small group, we're going to just be a little bit more casual in terms of talking about introducing ourselves, talking about the book and the different topics within the book, and hopefully reading some parts from it to give you a flavor of some of the ideas that we're talking about. But I think, like Elena said, anytime there's any questions or anything, please feel free to hop in. But a little bit of background. So Ted and I started working together back in 2014, I think. And we were working on a clinical research study. I was a coordinator on a study where we were kind of developing a program to help autistic adults improve different skills related to social interaction and relationships. And a part of that program, we were sort of developing different exercises and pieces that we sort of realized over time were really important to building connection and strengthening relationships, and were something that we were using ourselves. And so Ted had the crazy idea to have us write a book about it, which was the best idea he's had, and it led to many years of a really exciting writing project. Yeah, so Ted, I don't know if you want to introduce yourself a little bit.
I'm Ted. Let's see. Yeah, it's been really fun to write this book, and I think it got Ashley and I to think beyond the autism spectrum, just to all of us in our daily lives, and this concept of connection and attunement and so on, and connection being something that most of us take for granted with family and friends, I guess, but thinking about like how could we make the quality of these connections better, and like how could that positively impact our lives. So I think as we get into the book a little bit, hopefully you'll start to see that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we were gonna kind of dive into the main topic of the book, but maybe Ted, should we read a little bit from the beginning?
Sure. Do you
first?
want
Okay. Yeah, you want to?
Yeah, sure. All right, so this is from the very beginning of the book. Many stories have been told about extraordinary feats accomplished by advanced practitioners of meditation or yoga, including the seemingly magical control they have of their own bodies and physiology. If anyone should have such powers, it would be His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, one of the great meditation masters of our time. Once, at a public talk, a close friend of the Dalai Lama's, Professor Robert Thurman of Columbia University, was asked very directly about this. Had Professor Thurman ever seen the Dalai Lama perform a miracle or do something magical? He didn't know how to answer. He'd seen some remarkable things happen around the Dalai Lama, but perhaps His Holiness wouldn't approve if Professor Thurman seemed to exaggerate his abilities or proselytize. As he was mulling over how to reply, Thurman's wife, Nana, also a close friend of His Holiness, spoke up and said that she'd seen him perform plenty of miracles. What she meant, she explained, was his ability to give his full attention and focus to each and every person he met. The gentleman, who was hoping to hear some story of a dramatic, unexplained miracle, seemed disappointed with the answer. But Nana insisted that the way His Holiness connects with people is miraculous. The Dalai Lama, Buddhist monk and spiritual leader to millions, is understandably a very busy person who meets with countless people at various events virtually every day. Nevertheless, many observers have described that in every single social interaction, he engages with people by giving them his complete and total attention. No exceptions. Entering into conversation with him is a unique experience in which you feel completely seen and heard, without distraction. Professor Thurman described this by saying, quote, "Normally, when we talk to each other, we reach out to the person over there and communicate with them. With the Dalai Lama, there isn't space between us. He's over here with us." At first, it might seem inconceivable that someone's style of communication could be considered almost supernatural, a miracle, even if that person is the Dalai Lama. How could the ability to connect with another person ever seem outside the realm of ordinary human potential? His abilities seemed virtually miraculous because so few people, despite their potential, are able to connect and communicate with people in quite that way. This kind of connection may seem light years away from the real interactions we observe in our own lives, where we often don't pay more than cursory attention to each other. Most people move through their days chronically stressed and preoccupied with their own thoughts and worries, making them unable to really listen to others for long. With busy being the increasingly popular answer to questions about how someone is doing, we often seem to miss each other, like two ships passing in the night, almost touching, but not quite making contact. Even when we do meet, we somehow misunderstand each other or we talk past one another. Genuine, lasting connections feel elusive. In an era in which technology progressively takes up time and space that had previously been devoted to live in-person interactions, attunement, the ability to be aware of our own state of mind and body while also tuning in and connecting to another person, is perhaps the most needed and most neglected human capacity. Take a moment to consider your own life and your daily interactions with others. How many work meetings have you attended that seemed to be a waste of time because people were distracted by their devices? Everyone seemed to talk over each other or past each other and responded not to what the other person said, but to what was in their own head. It was as if each participant occupied their own world and remained stuck in their own perspective. How often have you noticed yourself getting lost in these situations, unable to identify how you were feeling or how you were coming across to others? At home, how many times has your child or partner felt lectured at instead of listened to? Other times, maybe it was you who was left feeling disappointed, hurt, or alone, because even those closest to you, family members, friends, partners, children, will not or cannot seem to fully tune into you, listen and understand you, respond to you. How much have you wished for someone who could?
Thanks,
So,
Dan.
so that was the very beginning of the book, and we were just trying to give people a flavor of these different types of connection. I mean, using the Dalai Lama, of course, as this sort of idealized example of outstanding connection with other people, but then the day-to-day experiences that a lot of us have of feeling like we're missing each other. We may be around other people, but sometimes we can feel lonely even when there's a lot of people around because it doesn't feel like we're quite connecting. So.
Yeah, so it was kind of, we were hoping too in that introductory piece. I remember when we were writing, trying to paint a vignette for people to, in some way, resonate with that description in terms of how they might be missing each other. Like it might not always be in every domain for every person. It might be in certain relationships, at work, with friendships, with just acquaintances having trouble connecting. And so we really try and think about this idea of attunement, which is our ability to be aware of our own state of mind and body, as well as tuning in and connecting to that of another person. And it's that ability to really make contact and be in sync with someone is what we really break down with our different pillars of attunement throughout the book. But I think up front, with the extreme example of the Dalai Lama, and then, the ways that attunement becomes impaired in all of our own lives. It's this idea that attunement spans lots of different types of relationships. It doesn't have to be really intimate, romantic or family or close friends. It can be just anybody that you meet. How do you make contact with them in a really genuine, rewarding way? I think was our hope with this, to be able to touch a lot of different types of people.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So we can talk about the different components of attunement, we break it down into these 4 pillars just to make it a little bit more easily understandable. But I think there's another section that Ted and I were talking about that helps people understand or visualize attunement a little bit more, because I think it's not really a popular phrase. It's something that we talk about, has been written about a little bit in research, especially related to parent-child, mother-child interactions, but a little bit less in like therapist-client relationships as well. But a little bit less so with just general relationships. So we wanted to define that a little bit for you. So I'll read that short section here. Attunement helps us to feel aware of ourselves and connected to another person, and it helps that other person feel just as connected to us. Attunement is a whole body experience, both kinesthetic and emotional, in which you can sense someone's rhythm, affect, and experience by essentially feeling like you're in their skin. Attunement goes one step past empathy by creating a 2-person experience of feeling connected, which is accomplished through reciprocal, dynamic, responding to one another's emotional states, needs, and desires. Attunement should not be viewed as simply fostering a touchy-feely emotional connection with others, but as a unique power, a power that enables us to perceive communications from others, to connect and have our message understood, and to manage conflict. Rather than an abstract, intangible concept, attunement is based on a specific set of skills, which research suggests can be developed with time and practice. True social emotional attunement can most easily be identified in those moments in which your attention is completely engrossed in a social situation with someone, whether that person is your closest confidant or a recent acquaintance. You can have a quality interaction with someone that includes elements like mindfulness, presence of mind, active listening, empathy, and cognitive understanding. But any one of those skills on their own is not attunement. True attunement is born from all of these elements working in conjunction, which allows you to be in sync and in tune with someone's expression of their experience. I think Ted and I too, when we talk about attunement and talk about this concept with people, we really try and encourage you to think about examples of relationships or even just, brief interactions that you've had that you remember as sort of beautiful. I think like when, you can think of like a love at first sight moment, but you can also think like sometimes you meet a friend or an acquaintance who you just connect with. And it's hard to describe in a way, but there's a certain beauty about really being able to see each other and understand each other. And I think what we're saying is that, sometimes it happens naturally, but it's also built upon these skills that you can really practice and develop and build on like a muscle. So we can break it down a little bit. And again, feel free to ask questions, or actually the other thing that'd be really helpful is if you guys start to think about examples of ways that attunement, goes really well in your life, or ways where you feel like it's a little bit of struggle, especially as we're talking about the different components, that could be really cool to hear as well.
Ashley, could I throw something in here?
Yeah.
Just to give you guys also a little bit more of a picture of what we talk about in the book in terms of this concept of attunement is, of course it comes up in conversations and relationships and things like that, but we also talk about it as being involved in, when musicians play with each other, like in a group. They have to be really aware of themselves and what they're doing and what their group mates are doing, and somehow be in sync or be responsive to each other. Or another example could be like athletes. We talk a little bit about basketball, like on a fast break down the court, 2 players, they have to be highly attuned to where they are on the court. They need to know what they're doing, what the other person, their teammates doing, what others are doing, and all in real time in a flowing sort of changing situation. So there's many different kind of contexts in which this concept comes up, and in which like developing this skill can be really, really useful.
Yeah, I love those examples. maybe we can talk a little bit about the first pillar, which we call relaxed awareness, as sort of the foundation for attunement. So relaxed awareness, I feel like, is kind of similar to mindfulness, but I think the way that we talk about it in the book really focuses on the way that you are becoming in tune with your sense of self, both physically and emotionally. And so some of the exercises that we talk about help you develop a sense of relaxation and a release of tension while also at the same time, maintaining a sense of awareness. And I think that piece is the strand that kind of connects all the different components of attunement to help you stay really present in any sort of situation and aware with what's going on.
Do you want me to do the exercise?
Yeah. So for everyone on the call, videos on or videos off, we're going to walk through one of the exercises that we have in the book. So for each component of attunement, we sort of lay out these very simple exercises that you can practice along the way to help you develop different components. So for this first one, for relaxed awareness, we thought we would just practice it and walk through it with y'all.
Yeah, so I'm going to read. So in the book, at the end of a lot of the chapters, there's some suggested exercises for developing these components of attunement. And we also have a website, missingeachother.com, in which we have videos of each of the exercises, and Ashley does a sort of voiceover instruction. So it's kind of like a guided exercise that you can use on your own. So we're going to just do one of them now, just to give you a flavor of it. This is in the chapter on relaxed awareness, which Ashley said is the foundation of attunement. And this is a sitting meditation exercise. So maybe we could I'll read it, but maybe you guys could try this if you're up for it. I'll read like a few sentences of initial instructions, and then I'll tell you what to do. For this exercise, start by keeping your eyes open and soft, not staring at anything, calmly aware of your environment. Your goal is to balance vivid alertness and awareness of your surroundings on the one hand, with calmness and ease on the other hand. In addition, don't use this exercise to shut away thoughts and, quote, clear your mind, but rather use it as an opportunity to notice your thoughts and feelings as they arise. Then let them pass by. If a thought or feeling is distracting or painful, rather than getting caught up in it, temporarily return your focus back to your posture, breath, and muscle relaxation. Then return your attention back to an open awareness of your surroundings. So these are the steps. Number one, to begin, sit on a comfortable surface. It's ideal to use a chair that's standard in height and so on. Sit a bit forward on the chair seat so that you're not resting your back on the back of the chair. You should be maintaining your own posture. Number two, keep your legs apart at about shoulder width, your knees at about a 90 degrees angle, and your feet flat on the floor in front of you. Number three, keep your back and neck straight but not tense, not leaning in any direction, as if your head were suspended from above. Do not arch your lower back. Gently tuck your chin inward, with the very top of your head lifting slightly backward and upward as if it were suspended from above. Let your shoulders and arms drop and relax your neck muscles. Relax your face muscles. We usually carry a lot of tension in our face, so this is a good one to focus on for a few seconds. Keep your eyes open, but with a soft, unfocused gaze. Calmly become aware of your environment and listen to the raw sounds around you. Breathe in and out through your nose. Make your breath long, slow, thin, and even. Place a hand on your stomach and become aware of the feeling of your belly expanding gently with your in-breath and relaxing with your out-breath. Take your time and relax during the out-breath. If your attention wanders to other thoughts, that's okay. It happens to virtually everyone. Let the thoughts come and go, And then try to bring your attention back to your breath and the movement of your belly with each breath. If you want, try to count your breaths. Start at 1 and count to 10, and then start again from 1. If you catch yourself at a number higher than 10, be kind to yourself and start again. So hopefully that was kind of relaxing. And the point of these things is that, we practice these, we encourage readers to practice these exercises at home, maybe for a few minutes a day, if you can find a regular time. And then we can't go through all these exercises, obviously, because of lack of time here, but there's sort of a step-by-step progression where you develop this feeling with practice of doing this, just sitting in a quiet environment at home. And then you can develop a similar feeling even like while you're walking outside. You can think to yourself, your head is suspended from above, your shoulders relax down, you feel your breath going in. And so you can be alert and aware of what's going on in your environment as you're walking down the street, but yet you can have a relaxed awareness. And I can say for myself, like a lot of times I do a lot of work at a desk for work, and sometimes it's stressful, and you can sort of unconsciously just start to tense up, and my shoulders are tense and I'm stressed and I'm thinking about a million things. And then I'm like, I need a break. I'm going to go take a walk. And then I start walking down the street, but I'm still carrying with me all the thoughts and worries and everything. And then sometimes I just think to myself, okay, head suspended from above, let your shoulders drop, feel your breath. And like really within a breath or two, I start to relax. It's really helpful. So, I mean, that's just one example. And then ultimately getting back to the theme of attunement, what we talk about in the book is integrating this into interactions with other people. Because, sometimes interactions with other people are stressful. We talk about listening and so on, and sometimes what you're hearing from the other person's upsetting. And so this can be a way of sort of regulating yourself and maintaining the connection with them and continuing to listen while not feeling overwhelmed or shutting down in some way.
Yeah, absolutely. Even as we were practicing that myself, it's making me realize how much of each day we're all just moving and doing something and thinking about something. It's no wonder that we might have less opportunity and less practice with just being in touch with the idea of how tense our bodies are or what our own emotions are that day. And so, like Ted was saying, when we're just carrying all of that, that bleeds into any type of interaction, like at the post office with someone who might annoy you in line, or at home when like your partner or children tries to talk to you and you're just overwhelmed with all these things that are getting in the way. It's not to say that a couple times of this exercise is going to turn you into the Dalai Lama, but it's going to give you the chance to try to get a little closer to being able to be a present, even just for a few more moments for some of those more challenging conversations.
Mm-hmm.
And it's hard for us. Like we're continuing to practice. I don't know if I'll ever be an expert. I think it's just been a gift to be able to really think about these components of attunement and how I'm like continually learning how they impact my own life and my patients' lives and people who are starting to read the book. So.
Can I ask a question real quick? Sorry,
Sure.
I don't know if this is going to derail you guys.
No, please do.
Question about this section, just because it's more of a clinical question, but I was leading a group of autistic adults this week, and they had mentioned that they want to be more in tune with other people specifically. That's what they said. And you guys are probably good experts to talk to about this, but and I had mentioned relaxed awareness and was really excited to bring it up, and had mentioned we could bring in meditation and some mindfulness exercises and they just sort of had a little bit of a visceral reaction that they weren't into meditation, they weren't into mindfulness. So I'm wondering if you guys have advice on maybe how to frame it, where
Mm.
I want to bring mindfulness into the room, but they were very clear that they are not into those types of exercises. So I don't know if my question makes sense, but
No, it does. Yeah. One thing is, did they say like why they were not into it? I'm just curious. Like, did they?
they sort of they have a few different things that they're not in. They're sort of like your typical, not typical, but they're a group of autistic college male students who like to do video games and don't
Mm.
really like to talk about their emotions, and they're very clear on what they like and don't like. And I think they maybe have had bad experiences with meditation in the past. I'm not really sure, honestly.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, Ashley, you might have thoughts too. I mean, I guess I don't know. Of course, I don't know exactly what was in their heads about why they didn't like it, but some people think meditation is like for hippies or something, or they think it's like spiritual or religious and they're not into that, or there could be all kinds of reasons potentially why um, some people might not like the idea of it. But I guess what I would try to do is reapproach it with them in a way that it's kind of like what we're talking about in the book, like meeting the other person where they are, right? Like, so getting a sense of like what they're into, what they value. I mean, in the book we talk about Tai Chi as a martial art, and we use some of that. So maybe they like martial arts, and meditation is used in that. So I guess, or maybe just explaining it to them, like, well, if you guys want to be in tune with others, something that can get in the way sometimes is a lot of anxiety and tension. Like, I don't know if you guys have ever experienced that, but when you feel really nervous or you feel really tense, it's hard to just, pick up on cues from other people or whatever. So these are just exercises. You don't even have to call it meditation necessarily. You could just call it like an exercise, a way of relaxing yourself. And so, one of the ways we explain it in the book, it's kind of like attunement or tuning into other people is a complex set of skills, kind of like, let's say, being able to play basketball, right? But to be able to learn to play basketball, you have to break it down usually into a few component skills, right? Like you learn dribbling, you learn shooting, you learn passing, and then ultimately you're going to put it all together so you can play a game and do all of those things. But at first, it's really useful to just learn these individual skills. And so you could potentially think of, like, instead of calling it meditation, you could think of it as like an attunement exercise that kind of like learning, dribbling in basketball or something. And I mean, that's my thoughts. I don't know if you have thoughts, Ashley.
Yeah, no, I love that question. I love that question because I think people on the spectrum might have that question, but I also think people not on the spectrum. I've heard so many people when I talk about my experience with these exercises or meditation in general, they look at me like, yeah, I tried Headspace for a couple days and it wasn't for me. And I think like the reasons Ted described is why they might not be interested. I think in addition to that, it's just hard to be with your thoughts and to sit with your anxiety and to sometimes our thoughts are not positive and happy and we just don't want to be thinking about them, which is why we scroll on Instagram or we play video games. So I think all of what Ted was saying, I agree with. I would also say focusing on the physical component of it, because I think that could be the first way to access how we're feeling just by doing like muscle relaxation and just trying to focus on the idea that if we have less tension in our body, that often is connected to less mental tension and then increased focus. But it was making me think there's so many stories that we talk about in the book where a lot of athletes actually use relaxed awareness and are incredibly skilled at relaxed awareness. Like we talk about Michael Jordan, Michael Phelps, people who are very high intensity athletes who are in very high highly intense competitive arenas where you would think that they would get overwhelmed by the stress of it, but they practice a lot of these same skills of relaxed awareness in order to be really in the flow of whatever that storm of activity is. And we were going to talk about it too, but there was another story that we talk about. Ted had a patient who was talking about kind of around the, I think, age of the people that you're describing, Morgan. And they were in a relationship, where they realized whenever they were in conversation with that other person, it was really hard to stay focused, and they just got lost in their thoughts, and they never kept up with that other person. And so the idea of practicing these skills with the motivation tied to it. So like, what was the motivation that they had in terms of, talking to girls or talking to other romantic interests or friends on campus? Like, I think maybe starting with that motivation too is a way to kind of work backwards into how could you see these skills being helpful in their lives. But thanks for the question.
Thank you. That was super helpful.
That's
Sorry.
a really good question.
Yeah. And it's so important because like the idea of it's not necessarily about how do we sell it, but in some ways it is, I guess. But how do you make it like palatable to people? Because this is a skill that we truly believe can have far-reaching impact the more people that practice it. And so thinking about ways to communicate that is something that Ted and I talk about all the time, just on this journey of talking about the book. How do we shape it in ways that are going to resonate with people? So I know I'm keeping an eye on time. Maybe, Ted, we can kind of summarize the other pillars and maybe read a story or so.
Yeah, that sounds good. Do you want to talk about them, or do you want me to talk about one?
Yeah, you want to describe listening? That's our second pillar.
Yeah, so I mean, each of these 4 pillars is sort of progressive. They each build upon the last one. So, when we build this foundation of relaxed awareness where we're able to get ourselves into that state through practice, then the next step is listening. And listening is kind of what it sounds like. It's, listening to another person, but it's not just hearing the sound of their voice. It's taking everything in from them, like seeing their facial expression, their body language, like really paying attention to them over some period of time, and being open enough to them to take in what they're saying, what they're communicating in all these different ways, and almost resonating with them, as strange as that may sound. So unconsciously, usually when we're really closely listening to someone, we're also sort of physically resonating with them, where there's often some mirroring that goes on. And often we also emotionally resonate with them in the sense that if they're expressing some emotion, we may start to feel a little bit of that too. Like if the person is crying and sad or something, we may start to feel a little bit sad if we're open enough to them, which we call emotional empathy. So I think listening is just having that openness to another person. And I think we all have some of that. The hard part is sustaining it for very long. I think, we live in a really distracting world where all kinds of things are pulling our attention away. So to really be able to give someone that focus, even for 5 minutes, I mean, that's one of the exercises that we have in the book. Some of the exercises we have are partner exercises where it's a listening exercise. And it's just sort of like if I were sitting here with Ashley and I just said, okay, Ashley, like, let me hear it, and I just sat here and really tried to listen for 5 minutes and just give her the floor and really try to give her as much of my full attention as I can. The other thing we talk about with listening is not just listening to the other person, but also listening to yourself. So that while I sat here for 5 minutes really listening to Ashley, then occasionally, just for a few seconds, I would kind of check back in with myself and think to myself, like, how am I feeling? And sometimes you can even do that through, like Ashley said, like physical sensations. Like, do I feel like my shoulders are starting to tense up? Am I, this or that? Is my heart racing or something? And just to have some sense of how you're feeling, because sometimes believe it or not, like having some awareness of your own feelings helps you to know what's coming from the other person because they're eliciting something in you. So those are the kinds of things that we talk about in the listening chapter. Of course, none of this is really easy. I mean, it sounds easy. Yeah, just listen to someone, but to really listen well like that can be challenging. And I think it takes like some practice and dedication, but we have some suggested exercises again in the book.
Yeah. The only thing I would add too is for the listening component, we also talk about a lot of stories that illustrate how oftentimes it can be a lot harder with people you disagree with, but also a lot harder with people you're very close with. Sometimes your closest relationships, you know, some of those embedded patterns or dynamics that you have in that relationship make it so much more difficult to not stay in the flow of whatever they're saying. And so I think sometimes thinking about using these skills as a way to enhance already close relationships can be pretty powerful as well. Yeah. Ted, were you gonna add something?
No, I was just agreeing with you. You want to talk about understanding a little bit?
Yeah. So, in a similar way, I think understanding, just like all of it, we keep repeating ourselves, but it just builds upon it. So it's like listening, hearing what someone's saying, listening to their words, listening to their nonverbal communication. What are they giving off based on what they're doing? And then understanding is really trying to practice and deepen your perspective taking skills, your emotional empathy with someone, being able to really kind of walk in their shoes and take that perspective, and at the same time be aware of how that perspective might be challenging for you, either emotionally, reacting to it, or you know, just having a hard time understanding what they're trying to communicate. One of my favorite examples in the book about understanding is, I think, the way that reactivity plays a role in how we understand one another. Like, I would encourage you guys to think about, like, in some relationship or interaction where you've had where someone starts to tell you something and maybe you perceived what they said in a certain way that caused you to react. And as soon as you react, if that reaction is outward to the other person, then they're going to react. And then it turns into this just kind of back and forth stimulus and response where you get, sometimes it can feel like you're, you know, those cartoons where you're tumbling down and the snowball is building and building and building until no one's hearing anyone. There's just a lot of yelling. No one even knows where the conversation started. So that sense of reactivity is something that I think we talk about, how you can start to understand your different filters. Everyone sees the world through their own unique lens based on their own unique experiences. And so kind of understanding yourself and how you might be interpreting things can be, I think, really helpful for strengthening the way you understand one another.
Yeah, I know that we're at like 6:40 California time. There's one other component we were going to talk about, mutual responsiveness, and we had a little bit of a reading on that, but maybe I was thinking maybe we could check in and see if anyone had any questions they wanted to ask, because I definitely want to leave enough time if anyone has a comment or question.
I really want to hear about the fourth pillar personally.
All right, awesome. Well, if no one else has any pressing questions, Ashley, do you want me to talk a little bit about it and maybe read this little section?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay. Yeah, so we talked about, just as a little recap, relaxed awareness, listening, understanding. Those three components. The relaxed awareness is like the state of mind and body. Listening and understanding is kind of what we're taking in from the other person and ourselves. But the last component, mutual responsiveness, is like the active component of attunement. It's actually what we do towards the other person. And so it's sort of like what it sounds. It's responding to the other person, but we talk about these three parts of responsiveness. One is trying to meet the other person where they are, because that's how we can get a connection initiated. We talk about a certain kind of responsivity that's sort of proportional to what they're saying and having that back and forth flow. But what I wanted to focus on was the last part of mutual responsiveness, which is staying in the flow. So to visualize this, you can sort of think of like, again, let's go back to the sports analogy, like basketball or something. When you're on that fast break down the court, like you got to stay in the flow, right? Like if you're one of those two people trying to do this fast break, you can't sort of just suddenly stop and in the middle of the court and start thinking about something, right? You got to stay in the flow. And so interactions with other people, whether it's a conversation, whether you're dancing with them, whether you're playing music with them, you've got to stay with them and you got to keep that connection, even as everything's changing, right? Even as you, so this little story is from one of our patients, and we wrote about this in the book, that I think kind of illustrates this. The distraction of our own thoughts, worries, and emotions can make it hard for us to stay in the flow of the present. One of our patients, a woman in her early 30s named Melanie, had a lot of difficulty staying in the flow because she would get extremely distracted by her own thoughts that arose when she was interacting with someone, especially when that someone was a potential romantic partner. This became a real problem when she was having coffee with Angela, someone she was getting to know. As they were talking and Angela would say or do something, Melanie would become preoccupied and wondering what Angela meant by that, why she said that, or if that could mean she was interested in her. While Melanie was wondering about those things, she fell way behind in the conversation to the point where she was only half paying attention to what she and Angela were saying. While this probably happens to a lot of us in these situations, it happened to Melanie to such a degree that it derailed her in the conversations. Suddenly realizing she had fallen behind in what they were talking about, Melanie would try to jump ahead, not only to what Angela was saying in the moment, but ahead 2 or 3 steps in an effort to anticipate and guess what Angela might say. So instead of staying in the flow, Melanie was either lagging behind or jumping ahead. In our therapy sessions, we took a look at this situation together and brainstormed about another way that Melanie could handle these situations. We did a kind of thought experiment together, making use of a soccer analogy, since Melanie loved to play soccer, and thinking about soccer was much more relaxing to Melanie than the actual topic of how Angela might feel about her. In this experiment, Melanie imagined that she was a soccer player on defense, and that an offensive player on the other team was dribbling the ball down the field, heading straight toward Melanie. If we freeze frame that moment, Melanie might be wondering about the other player's intentions. What was her opponent going to do next? Would she try to break right or left around her? But soccer moves quickly, and if Melanie were to become so preoccupied with that question, so much so that she was no longer in the flow of what was actually happening, then it would be easy for her in this distracted state to lose contact with the other player and for that player to speed past Melanie toward the goal. On the other hand, if Melanie noticed the question in her mind, but quickly returned her attention to what the player with the ball was actually doing, then Melanie could stay in the flow and be more effective as a defender. The anxious thoughts were sucking up her reserve of energy and attention that she could use to respond to whatever happened next. Melanie was actually good at this when it came to soccer. She could get into a flow state and become relaxed and aware, ready to respond to whatever the opposing player did. So she knew she was capable of having that kind of mindset. But how could she bring this to a situation that she wasn't so comfortable in? There's a little more to that story, but maybe I'll pause there. But I think that just gives you a flavor of the sense of responsiveness, and part of responsiveness being staying with that other person, even as things change, whether it's a soccer player coming towards you, trying to get past you with the ball, or whether it's someone you're romantically interested in and you're having a conversation and you're kind of nervous about it. And it's challenging. I mean, these things we talk about, I think, are really challenging. They're things that probably most of us struggle with in one way or another, or in some contexts. But that's sort of the point of the book, is to try to better understand these things and give some exercises to try to develop these skills.
Yeah, and as you were talking, Ted, I was thinking too about so many other examples of that idea of responsiveness. Like if you're in an interview, coming into any sort of situation where you come in prepared and you have things that you want to say and you want to communicate, or if you're talking to someone with very opposite political views and you're having a heated conversation, whatever that might be, I think we're saying that you have more power in that situation, and you're able to be more effective when you stay with that person no matter where they go, even if it is in an unexpected direction. The interviewer asks you a question that you don't really know how to answer, or you start going down a topic that you're not really sure of how to cite evidence for, how to convey your point across. All of those situations are going to be probably cause a little bit more anxiety or make you more nervous, or sort of just kind of mess with you a little bit. And so leaning back on those foundational components of relaxed awareness allows you to sort of save some of that energy, like in the story with Melanie and Angela, of instead of letting a lot of that energy go towards just feeling totally at a loss, trying to re-regulate yourself enough so that you can kind of start again and jump back into that dialogue.
Mm-hmm. And one of the points too that we make is that this state of relaxed awareness and so on doesn't mean being like not having any emotions or being sort of emotionally dead or something like that. I mean, it means having emotions, feeling your emotions, but not feeling totally overwhelmed, and so that you're sort of shutting down from those emotions. And another point we make is that basically that no one is perfect at this. This is really hard to do. And I bet even the Dalai Lama has occasional moments of misattunement.
I wish we knew of some of those stories so we could have talked about those. But
yeah,
so far he seems perfect.
And even in like sort of beautiful, sort of perfect seeming attuned relationships, like a mother and a baby, let's say, or, something like that, researchers have studied this and shown that there are multiple kind of breaks in the attunement between mothers and babies, but that's just natural. That happens. We don't have to be perfectionistic about it. But one of the things we talk about in the book is, so falling out of attunement, falling out of connection is inevitable. It's going to happen in micro moments or in larger, periods of time. But another skill is just learning the skill of beginning again. So we fell out of attunement, we fell out of sync. Like, how do we regroup and begin again and reconnect? So I think the reality of interactions and relationships is this process of connecting. It's going really well, and then there's a little break, and then we fell out of attunement, and then learning to just begin again. So.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
So I'm curious, we've all been in this pandemic isolation mode now for almost a year, and I'm curious whether you've done much thinking on how virtual interactions differ or maybe don't from this work that you've been doing, and that you suggest that we all do in order to not miss each other quite so much. And also too, I mean, just the fact that even in person, we're wearing masks and you can't see facial expression, and what I'm just curious if you guys have thought much on that.
Ashley, do you want to respond? Or
Yeah, sure. It's been, I think there's no easy answer and there's no one solution. I think everyone is just trying to do the best they can and just try and find the methods that they can. I mean, we've talked about a lot about how the idea that we can have these Zoom meetings and you can video chat people is a great kind of technological advance that we have, but it comes with the idea that like sometimes our audio and our visuals are not in sync, and it's sort of awkward to be looking at your own face, which is something that you never do in a normal interaction. So there's some, like, it's not the same as the in-person situations. I'm actually a big proponent of practicing a lot of these skills that we talk about on the phone, where you don't have the visual distraction and you can kind of just practice the idea of focusing on what someone is saying. And even that amount, you know, you're building some of that skill in. So that, I mean, that's just kind of like one way to think about how to get around it. But you're right. I mean, in person, not being able to see facial expressions. I know the deaf community is limited in being able to read lips as well, which is difficult. So that is something that we're gonna try and continue to figure out how to innovate, because it's, you know, this is definitely a longer term situation than we expected. But
Yeah.
as much as you can do kind of distanced outdoor situations to try and stay in touch is encouraged, but it's nice that we have these alternatives.
Yeah, I agree. I don't have much to add except to just say that, like, we started this book long before we knew there would be a COVID pandemic. So it's been really interesting to think about these issues. And yeah.
In some ways, I think, yeah, of course. And I mean, with COVID too, we've thought about how it's just totally transformed people's relationships. You know, sometimes for some people who live alone, the majority of their interactions are happening at work or on their commute, and to not have those at all has required innovation in terms of thinking about how do we generate new relationships, or for families who are now spending way more time than they have ever spent together before, thinking about how do we not go crazy with so much connection, and how to have like really intentional conversation and interactions. In some ways, you know, I think for some families, depending on the situation, it's been a blessing to be able to strengthen those skills in a way where time just didn't allow prior to this. But it's really all hit or miss depending on the context.
Yeah. Anybody else have any questions or comments?
I just wanted to follow up and say that another issue that Ashley and I have started to think about and even write about a little bit is what it's going to be like when ultimately someday the pandemic is over and we can all just reunite without our masks and everything. And it's it'll be interesting. I mean, it may be almost like a sensory overload. Like, we're not used to that anymore. And we'll have to sort of readjust. And I think that our relaxed awareness skills could really come in handy then.
I agree. I think about this constantly, actually.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, so I live alone, and even before the pandemic, I worked from home most of the time. So now I'm even more isolated than I was. And I think there's going to be a lot of people that are going to have like a PTSD reaction almost to, you know, crowds and being around other people.
Yeah.
And being fearful, and that's going to make it really hard for a lot of people to kind of re-enter social society. And then I think there's going to be a lot of people who are going to just go full bore into it in a big way. And maybe, well, yeah, I'm so fascinated by how all that's going to play out. And I mean, you two are studying social interaction, so it's going to be really interesting, you know, to see how you guys follow up this work.
I think it's really interesting too. And like, we were thinking about both the kind of maybe sensory overload that some people might have, and then maybe like missing, like for me personally, like I'm at home now a lot with my kids who've been doing school from home, and like it's been really fun to have this time. And I feel like when we all just go back to our work and school, I'm going to kind of miss them, you know. So it's going to be this weird mix. It's going to be a relief in many ways, but I think it's going to also be an adjustment.
Yeah. We're just about at 7 o'clock. Any last thoughts?
Well, you know, I had found your book, I guess Next Book Club, whatever. And I went to the website and I saw the exercise and oh, this is all about, you know, how you connect with someone in person. But this is so essential to any forum, like whether it's through this media or through that, through the phone, like Ashley was saying. It was just so useful. And I just really appreciated this talk. And one of the things I was thinking about during this is how do we get higher quality connections through these methods, right? Because we have these times where we're on the phone with people, where we're on these videos. So what are some small tactics? Because you said that there's a bunch, right, that we can use throughout our interactions that will help us focus. Because I know that I'm on video calls a lot, and man, I don't remember what we said, don't remember what we did.
Yeah.
I mean, one thing I would just say is, like, comes to mind is trying to have more one-on-one interactions. I feel like sometimes that can sort of clear the noise and allow for strengthening like a genuine connection, and also just building on those skills individually to forge those sort of deeper connections is one idea that comes to mind. Ted, what do you think?
Yeah, I think that's a really good idea, Ashley. I didn't even think about that, but I think the one-on-ones, the really big Zoom groups or something, I understand what you mean. I can easily zone out in those. I've also, you may have experienced this, or we've heard friends say this, that, this phenomenon of Zoom fatigue, where people they don't feel good after too much time on Zoom. It may be this sort of out of syncness or not getting cues the way you would in a natural situation. Or all of the above, but I think also just giving yourself some breaks from Zoom if you can. I mean, I know some people's work requires them to be on Zoom meetings for like many, many hours, and I guess there's not much you can do about that. But to the extent that you can take breaks and, if there are people that you can be live with, like interacting with them or outside and trying to get some balance there, I think could be really helpful. And thank you for what you said about the book and the website. I really appreciate that. And feel free to tell some friends about it, or review it on your favorite book site or
It's
anything.
a great book club book.
Yeah, because we would love to kind of spread the word and just let people know about it.
I appreciate you being here, and you too, Morgan.
Yeah, Morgan.
And my family.
Yes.
Thanks, Elena.
Yay. Well, thank you guys so much. This was a really fascinating evening discussion. I'm so glad that we were able to join together and be together, even if it's over Zoom for this. Maybe when the paperback comes out, we'll be able to meet in person and talk about it. So thank you all so much. We do have the book for sale at the store. We do ship if you don't have it already. You can go to napabookmine.com and order that, or we're open. Thank you so much to Ted. Thank you to Ashley for being here, and thank you all. Any last words before I shut us down?
Oh, thank you all for coming. It was so fun.
Yeah, thanks for coming. Thanks, Elena. Thanks for hosting.
Thanks, Elena. It's good. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone. Have a great night.
Bye.